Okay, hello everybody. I'm just wondering if all is working now. Hello, good evening. We are meeting for the 53rd time. And today we are also available on 3 channels. It's a YouTube channel, the Pharmacy College channel, and also on a Facebook. So today we have our guests and also the leader of the project in Canada, Dr. Regis Vaillancourt, who introduced his students. Hello, Dr. Vaillancourt. Hello, Regis. Please just summarize us the project that we've done for the last year and all the things that we are doing together as well.
Well, thank you and welcome, Pure. So thank you for inviting us. My name is Dr. Regis Vaillancourt. I'm the Director of Pharmacy at the Pediatric Hospital. I've also been involved quite a last few years, I would say, with Polish pharmacists in different ways through Pure and different projects and publishing together. Today, talking about what we have done, we've done part of a series of presentations on different subjects that affect pharmacy practice in Canada. Today, we have 2 different types of projects. One of them is about the impact of selling cannabis. We'll call it the bud tender as bartender, and what the impact of these. Sorry. So it's a different project. Talking about the the impact of COVID-19. Sorry, there's too many projects. The impact of COVID-19 and the use of cannabis. That Olivia, a pharmacy student, has been with us for the last 5 weeks. And the next project, it's about the benefit of having a pharmacist managing blood products. So Olivia has been with us, and she's a 5th-year pharmacy student, and she'll be the first one presenting. So Olivia, I think we're giving you the floor now.
Yeah, Olivia, please.
So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here.
Yes, please.
Are you able to see that?
Absolutely, all is fine.
Okay, great. So as Dr. Vaillancourt had mentioned, my name is Olivia Gallagher, and I'm a 4th-year pharmacy student at the University of Toronto, currently doing a research rotation with the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. So today I'll be presenting to you the findings from our research project entitled The Impact of the COVID-19 Pandemic on Cannabis Consumption, a cross-sectional survey. So I'd just first like to take the time to acknowledge the principal investigator, Dr. Vaillancourt, as well as the co-investigators of this project, Dr. Cameron, Rahim, and Dr. Lahid, who have contributed greatly and provided ongoing guidance throughout this project. So as we all know, on March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared the 2019 novel coronavirus, more commonly referred to as COVID-19, a global pandemic. Since this declaration, several safety measures have been recommended and implemented to prevent the transmission of COVID-19, including, but not limited to, physical distancing, face coverings, and self-isolation. These measures, in combination with the social and economic changes caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, have impacted many aspects of people's lives, such as their education or employment status, mental health, and substance use. So to develop a schema for how these 3 aspects have been affected, let's take a look at some Canadian statistics. From February to April 2020, 5.5 million Canadian workers were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Similarly, 26% of post-secondary students indicated that their studies have been disrupted by the outbreak. Without a doubt, the COVID-19 pandemic changed behaviors and daily life, which has had detrimental implications on mental health. Polls conducted by Mental Health Research Canada continue to find that the proportion of Canadians experiencing anxiety remains at least 4 times as high as compared to pre-pandemic levels. Given the common co-occurrence of mental health conditions and substance use, an increase in substance use during the pandemic was not unforeseen. In fact, survey results found that 6.5% of Canadians 15 years of age and older increased their consumption of cannabis as compared to their pre-pandemic consumption levels. So with all this being said, this leads me to our 2 research objectives. The main objective of this study was to explore how cannabis users' characteristics and consumption patterns have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. More specifically, we wanted to identify how the type of cannabis user, source of cannabis, form of cannabis, indication for use, and frequency of use have changed from 30 days before the COVID-19 pandemic to the past 30 days under the current COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. Secondary objectives included characterization of differing responses according to sociodemographics, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on education or employment status, coronavirus anxiety, as well as sleep. So transitioning now to the methods, the design of this study was a cross-sectional survey on COVID-19 and cannabis use between May and September 2020. Recruitment for this study consisted of using targeted social advertisements as well as shared social media posts on community platforms. Advertisements were disseminated by Leger Marketing Inc. polling, which allowed for distribution of the web-based survey link to their panelists. The participants included in the study were those that reported using cannabis in the past year and selected cannabis as their country of residence. Conversely, participants that were not proficient in English, which was the language that the survey was written in, were excluded as they were required to self-complete the survey. To assess cannabis use and consumption patterns, 5 questions were asked on the survey. Each question was asked twice, once relative to 30 days immediately before the COVID-19 pandemic, also referred to as before COVID-19, and then once relative to the past 30 days under the current COVID-19 pandemic restrictions, also referred to as during COVID-19. So the questions were, 1, what type of user are you? 2, how do you get the cannabis you use? 3, in what form do you use cannabis most often? 4, please indicate the reason for your cannabis use. And finally, 5, how often were you using cannabis? Changes in cannabis use during the COVID-19 pandemic were determined based on the question, how often were you using cannabis? So responses provided before COVID-19 were compared to responses provided during COVID-19. And then they were categorized into an increased cannabis use, no change in cannabis use, or decreased cannabis use. To assess if participants' employment or education status had been impacted by the pandemic, the following question was posed. Has your employment status or education status been impacted by COVID-19? Responses to this question included no, yes, or prefer not to answer. To assess sleep, participants were asked to provide the time at which they usually turn off the lights to go to sleep, as well as the time at which they usually wake up at on both weekdays and weekends. Participants were also asked to rate their overall sleep quality and quantity, which were then dichotomized to good and bad. The final measure used in this survey was the Coronavirus Anxiety Scale, also referred to as CAS. The Coronavirus Anxiety Scale was created by Dr. Sherman A. Lee to develop and evaluate a brief mental health screener to respond to mental health needs resulting from COVID-19. The study involved collecting online survey data from 775 adults in the USA. Participants had to have spent at least 1 hour during the past 2 weeks thinking about and/or watching media about COVID-19, and also be experiencing significant anxiety, fear, or worry about the disease outbreak. The survey asked participants to provide a variety of information, and 20 potential items were selected based on the psychology of fear and anxiety literature. So as you can see here, those 20 potential items were then narrowed down to 5 key items: dizziness, sleep disturbance, tonic immobility, appetite loss, and nausea or abdominal distress. As you can see here on the right side of the screen, these 5 key items were posed as statements in relation to the question, how often have you experienced the following activities over the last 2 weeks? Each item was rated on a 5-point scale that ranges from 0, not at all, to 4, nearly every day. A total score of 9 or greater indicates probable dysfunctional coronavirus-related anxiety. So results from the study show that the Coronavirus Anxiety Scale has good discrimination ability and diagnostic accuracy, thus making it a suitable mental health evaluation tool. The study found CAS scores to be strongly positively correlated with things such as functional impairment, alcohol or drug coping, and passive suicidal ideation. The 2 key takeaways from this study include that it was the first published and validated tool that examines anxiety related to COVID-19, And this can also be used by health professionals and researchers during the COVID-19 pandemic to proactively identify and treat people with mental health conditions. To collect the data, the survey was built and facilitated through the Research Electronic Data Capture, also known as REDCap platform, hosted by the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. Survey responses were thus systematically collected and managed, with each participant being assigned a unique study code as no direct patient identifiers were obtained. IBM SPSS version 25 was used to perform both descriptive and inferential statistics. So now let's transition and look at the study results, first describing the sociodemographics of the study population. A total of 1,072 participants were used for data analysis. The mean age of participants was 44 years old, with participants ranging from 17 years old to 82 years old. As you can see here from the pie graph on the bottom left, there was almost an equal split between males and females. So now if you look over at the bar graph at right of the percentage of respondents according to marital status, you can see that most participants, or 40%, were married, followed by 29% who were single. A comparison of participants' urbanicity revealed that most, or 77%, lived in an urban area, whereas 23% lived in a rural area. Looking at the bar graph at right of the percentage of respondents according to highest level of education, you can see that most participants had a non-university certificate or diploma equal to 40%, followed by 31% having a bachelor's degree. Looking at participants' education or employment status before the COVID-19 pandemic, the bar graph at left shows that most participants, or 45%, were employed full-time, followed by those who were retired at 21%. The pie graph at right displays whether participants' education or employment status was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Most participants, or 65%, reported that the pandemic did not have an impact on their education or employment status. The responses to the 5 questions regarding cannabis use and consumption patterns did not reveal any statistically significant differences between the 2 time points before COVID-19 versus during COVID-19. However, for frequency of cannabis use during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a noteworthy increase. In the bar graph, the lighter blue bars represent responses provided relative to before COVID-19, whereas the dark blue bars represent responses provided during COVID-19. So as you can see here on the far left, before the COVID-19 pandemic, most participants reported using cannabis once a month. Whereas if you look at the far right, during COVID-19, most participants actually reported using cannabis more than once a day. Now looking at changes in cannabis use frequency, although most participants reported no change in their cannabis use frequency at 80%, 14% did report an increase in cannabis usage during the COVID-19 pandemic. With focus on those with increased cannabis usage, further analyses involved dichotomizing these groups into increased cannabis usage, which are represented here in light blue bars, versus no increase in usage, which is dark blue bars here. A significant gender difference was found where the risk of increased cannabis usage versus no increase in usage was 56% higher in females versus males. Furthermore, a significant difference between marital status and change in cannabis use frequency was found. Analyses displayed in the bar graph at left here reveal that the risk of increased cannabis usage versus no increase in usage was 83.1% higher among respondents that were single versus all other marital statuses. Another significant difference was found between the highest level of education completed and change in cannabis use frequency. Further analyses displayed in the bar graph here at right reveal that the risk of increased cannabis usage versus no increased cannabis usage was 203.9% higher among respondents with a bachelor's degree or higher compared to all other lower levels of education. So now looking at participants' level of coronavirus-related anxiety, most participants scored less than 9 on the coronavirus anxiety scale, and thus 78% were considered to be experiencing low coronavirus-related anxiety, pictured here in dark blue. Conversely, 22% were experiencing high coronavirus anxiety, which is here in light blue. So now if we look at the bar graph at right, we can see a significant gender difference with respect to level of coronavirus anxiety. Compared to males, females were 55.3% more likely to experience high coronavirus-related anxiety. Furthermore, a significant difference was found between the highest level of education and the level of coronavirus-related anxiety. As displayed here in the bar graph at the left, compared to all levels of education, those with a bachelor's degree or higher were 55% more likely to experience high coronavirus-related anxiety. In the bar graph at the right, a significant difference between education or employment status immediately before COVID-19 and the level of coronavirus-related anxiety was found. So compared to all levels of education or employment status, those who are retired were 45.5% less likely to experience high coronavirus-related anxiety. And finally, a significant difference between education or employment status being impacted by COVID-19 and the level of coronavirus-related anxiety was observed. So compared to those whose education or employment status was impacted, which is the two sections here, those whose education or employment status remained unchanged, which is here on the left, were 51.4% less likely to experience high coronavirus-related anxiety. So finally, just taking a quick look at the results regarding participants' sleep. As displayed in the pie graphs at left here, most respondents reported that both their sleep quality as well as their sleep quantity was good. A cross-sectional analysis with coronavirus-related anxiety revealed that compared to those with good sleep quality, those with bad sleep quality were 89.8% more likely to experience high coronavirus-related anxiety. Similarly, compared to those with good sleep quantity, those with bad sleep quantity were 82.8% more likely to experience high coronavirus-related anxiety. Looking at the mean sleep durations on the bottom right, the mean for youth 17 years of age was 9 hours and 7 minutes. The mean for adults aged 18 to 64 was 8 hours and 20 minutes. And finally, the mean for adults 65 years of age and older was 8 hours and 21 minutes. So now we'll transition into some points of discussion. First, looking at the responses to the 5 questions related to cannabis use and consumption patterns. As you may recall, the first question pertained to the type of cannabis user. The most frequently reported response to this question was using cannabis for recreational purposes, followed by recreational and medical, and finally for medical purposes only. This finding is consistent with a cannabis survey conducted by Health Canada. The second question pertained to the source of cannabis. Most respondents reported purchasing their cannabis from an authorized outlet, but surprisingly, 18% still reported obtaining cannabis illegally. The literature does cite there being a decrease in the percentage of cannabis obtained illegally, but the question still remains if this is related to the pandemic itself, or if it represents a more permanent behavior change due to the relatively recent legalization of cannabis here in Canada. The third question related to the form of cannabis most used. The most frequently reported response was inhaled, specifically smoking. Although this finding is consistent with the cannabis survey conducted by Health Canada, it is concerning given the recommendations from Canada's lower risk cannabis use guidelines. To give you a little bit of background, the lower risk cannabis use guidelines present 10 recommendations that allude to using cannabis more safely and are based on the best available scientific evidence. So recommendation 5 in the guidelines states that regular inhalation of combusted cannabis adversely affects respiratory health outcomes. The fact that smoking cannabis is the most common form is also concerning in the present context of COVID-19, as the literature highlights the fact that this could potentially worsen the respiratory symptoms of COVID-19. Now, looking at the last question related to the frequency of cannabis use, as mentioned earlier, there was a shift in the most frequently selected answer from selecting once a month before COVID-19 to selecting more than once a day during COVID-19. Again, comparing this finding to the lower risk cannabis use guidelines, recommendation 7 states that frequent or intensive, such as daily or near daily cannabis use, is strongly associated with higher risks of experiencing adverse health and social outcomes. So now if we think back to the results for changes in cannabis use frequency, the first finding was that females were more likely than males to report increased cannabis usage during the COVID-19 pandemic. Interestingly, this finding contradicts a previous study that found that during times of economic insecurity, the greatest increases in cannabis use are among men. The second finding related to respondents that were single being more likely to report an increase in cannabis use during the COVID-19 pandemic. This finding is consistent with the literature, given that loneliness can lead to more frequent use of cannabis, and this makes sense given the increased prevalence of loneliness during the pandemic. The third finding related to respondents that are more highly higher feelings of boredom or anxiety during the pandemic and thus increase their use of cannabis. So now discussing some of the results pertaining to the coronavirus-related anxiety in the context of the US Census Bureau Household Pulse Survey. The first finding was that females were more likely than males to experience high coronavirus-related anxiety. This finding is consistent with the literature as well as the US Census survey that found that females consistently had higher self-reported symptoms of anxiety during COVID-19. The second finding was that respondents with a bachelor's degree or higher were more likely to experience high coronavirus-related anxiety. Interestingly, this finding actually contradicts the US Census survey that found that individuals with a bachelor's degree or higher reported the lowest symptoms of anxiety during COVID-19. This discrepancy could be perhaps due to the fact that the survey looked at all aspects of anxiety during COVID, whereas our survey just specifically looked at anxiety related to COVID-19. The third finding was that retired respondents were less likely to experience high coronavirus-related anxiety, and this finding was consistent with the US Census survey. The Canadian 24-hour movement guidelines are evidence-based guidelines that were developed by leaders from the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiology. As you can see here in the diagram on the top right, the guidelines focus on the integration of sedentary behavior, physical activity, and sleep, providing guidance on the best combination of these behaviors for Canadians of all ages. Canadian 24-hour movement guidelines are represented here in the boxes on the left, were compared to the mean sleep durations for the 3 different age groups in the study. And as you can see, surprisingly, all of the mean sleep durations found in the study would be classified according to the guidelines as achieving sufficient sleep. When it came to self-reported sleep quality and quantity, the majority of respondents stated that both were good. Interestingly, this finding contradicts numerous studies that have found that cannabis use causes sleep disturbances. It's important to keep in mind, however, that the link between sleep and cannabis use remains unclear. Essentially, individuals report sleeping difficulties during periods of abstinence, but studies have also found that cannabis users met the criteria for subthreshold or clinical insomnia when using cannabis. So to end this presentation, I would just like to leave you with some thoughts regarding some areas for future research. The first was that I highlighted on the previous slide. Future research should aim to distill the link between cannabis use and sleep to know whether cannabis is helpful or harmful with regards to sleep. Furthermore, as the COVID-19 pandemic is still ongoing, there is a need for a 3-way comparison of cannabis use patterns So essentially comparing before COVID-19, during COVID-19, and then after COVID-19. And finally, the findings of this study should be a call to implement practical interventions to reduce the incidence of smoking cannabis and the sustained frequency of cannabis use in line with the lower risk cannabis use guidelines. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Olivia. We are just wondering if there are any questions. Okay, actually, I'm going just to tell that we are just going to perform the similar study in Poland, and we are just looking forward to get our results. So hopefully soon we'll just also be able to publish them and show them as a presentation. So it was a very interesting presentation, and we can see that definitely the COVID-19 wasn't a very good part of our lives regarding all areas of our lives. Yeah, thank you.
I look forward to hopefully seeing some of the results that are being published there and produced there. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliva. And now we have Damien. Regis, would you like to add something? Okay. Yes, we can hear you. We want to see you as well.
Having a pharmacy in the blood bank. So that's why we decided to put a pharmacist, and Damien's going to report today about having a pharmacist in the blood bank. So Damien, go for it.
Yes. Okay, can you see it?
Absolutely fabulous.
Okay, perfect. So, hello everyone, my name is Damien Roux. I'm a French student in double degree in 5th years of pharmacy and in 1st year of business school at Lyon in France. I am currently doing an internship at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, and today I will present you a pilot project that was conducted here, which aims to assess the impact of a pharmacist on the management of clotting factors in hemophilia population. So to begin, a quick reminder of what hemophilia is. Hemophilia has been known for a long time. For example, the Talmud, a collection of Judaic writing from the 2nd century before Christ, decreed that male babies did not need to be circumcised if 2 of their brothers had already died from the procedure before them. Today, we know that hemophilia is a rare genetic disease which is inherited in most cases. However, this may be due to spontaneous mutation in some few cases. It is a recessive disease linked to the X chromosome, but the question of recessivity does not arise in boys. Indeed, as you know, boys have only one X chromosome, which they inherit from their mother. So hemophilia is affecting males and is transmitted by women carriers of the mutation. Hemophilia A is caused by a mutation in the F8 gene at the Q28 locus of the X chromosome that code for clotting factor 8. It affects less than 1 in 10,000 people. Hemophilia B, or Christmas disease, is due to a mutation in the F9 gene at the Q27 locus of the X chromosome that codes for clotting factor 9. Hemophilia B is even less common than hemophilia A, affecting about 1 in 50,000 people. We have also hemophilia C, which is a non-X-linked factor 11 deficiency that affects both sexes but is very rare. The mutation results in a disorder of clotting factor synthesis, and the decrease in factors leads to a blockage in the secondary hemostasis reaction chain of coagulation, which can't stop bleeding. Hemophilias are classified according to the level of circulating factor, which gives the degree of severity of hemophilia. It is severe if the level is less than 1% of the normal, resulting in frequent spontaneous bleeding. It is moderate if it's between 1 and 5%, resulting in prolonged bleeding with trauma or surgery, for example. And it is minor if it is between 5 and 40%, resulting in rare and only provoked bleeding. The basic treatment to stop or prevent bleeding in people with hemophilia A and B is factor replacement therapy. This is an infusion of factor 8 or 9 concentrates given to supplement the patient's lack. Factors are either derived from human plasma or are recombinant. They are used in two ways. On-demand treatment, which consists of administering the factor concentrate infusion as soon as bleeding begins. The goal is to stop the bleeding without delay before it can damage the joint or muscle. In prophylactic treatment, people with hemophilia receive factor concentrate regularly. The goal is to keep blood level of factor high enough to prevent bleeding. This type of treatment is often used in children with severe hemophilia. Research has shown that prophylactic treatments give children the best chance of reaching adulthood without damaging their joints. After an infusion of concentrate, all the protein necessary for coagulation are in place. The hemophiliac's blood becomes normal. But unfortunately, the replaced clotting factors do not persist in the bloodstream. Patients with hemophilia A usually infuse 2 or 3 times per week, while due to the longer half-life of factor 9, patients with hemophilia B infuse 1 or 2 times per week. To improve the half-life, some factors have been modified thanks to single-chain technology or albumin fusion, for example. These factors are called the extended half-life product or EHL product. Prophylactic treatment with clotting factors reduces the number of bleeds and their consequences on joints and organs, thus increasing the length and quality of life of patients. Nevertheless, it represents a real financial burden. Whether recombinant or plasma-derived therapies, factors are expensive drugs that follow complicated pharmacokinetic trajectory, making it difficult to use them in an optimal way. With the introduction of the new extended half-life product, efficient management of clotting factor has become even more challenging. Indeed, many of these newer products have considerable inter-individual variation in half-life. For example, Adenovat has been shown in clinical trials to have a half-life that ranges from 6 to 30 hours depending on the patient. Given these products are more costly than the current half-life standard products such as Xinta, switching a patient without improving the factor half-life is very cost inefficient. Effective management of factors therefore requires tailoring treatment to the patient. To do so, it is essential to assess and interpret the pharmacokinetic profile of patients. But to be performed systematically, pharmacokinetic assessment requires sufficient time to make the extensive arrangement, ensure patient availability, and coordinate a time to review the result with the care team. A dedicated pharmacist could greatly assist this process by standardizing the approach and assisting with the interpretation of the pharmacokinetic results. Since the therapy for patients with moderate to severe hemophilia costs $500,000 Canadian dollars per year per patient, small changes could result in significant cost savings. In Canada, there was no role for the pharmacist as part of the comprehensive care team for the hemophilia population. As in Canada, in the US, there was no role for pharmacists in the hemophilia care team. So the hemophilia management program and the factor stewardship program were conducted to evaluate the impact of including a pharmacist in the management of hemophilia patients. Give the pharmacist the opportunity to participate in rounds, multidisciplinary meetings, and regular patient assessments. One of the pharmacist's roles was also to provide guidelines and training to the care team in order to deepen and update the knowledge of each staff member involved. He helped to coordinate the transition of care to the community by facilitating the flow of information with the pharmacy service. All of these new missions allow the pharmacist to improve the management of clotting factors and to significantly reduce the costs and the quantity of factor used The purpose of this pilot project was to determine whether a transfusion medicine pharmacist would make the management of clotting factors most cost efficient, and to identify the pharmacist activities in the clinic due to this new role. The intent of incorporating this pharmacist as part of the care team was to optimize protocols and maximize cost saving through reduced wastage. This project occurred at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario in Canada. CHO patients receiving prophylactic treatment with clotting factors were eligible for treatment optimization. We compared the pre-intervention strategy, the current model of care without pharmacist involvement, to the post-intervention strategy, a model of care that includes pharmacist intervention and support. We conducted a cost minimization design study to determine the most cost-efficient clotting management strategy. We assumed that the effectiveness of both strategies was the same. The study was conducted from the perspective of the payer, Canadian Blood Services, with a 1-year time horizon. Only drug prices were considered, since other sources of cost, such as administration and storage costs, are assumed to be the same or not to contribute enough to be considered. Canadian Blood Services has provided with the cost per unit of each of the clotting factors used, and we assume that the annual salary of a pharmacist is 130,000 Canadian dollars. The pharmacist began with a 3-month phase-in period, followed by 9 months of specification on optimization protocol with the goal of cost saving. The McMaster Web Accessible Population Pharmacokinetic Service, or WAPS-HEMO, served as the basis for therapeutic optimization. WAPS-HEMO generates pharmacokinetic profiles that allow the pharmacist to tailor the treatment to the real clotting factors goal and needs of the patient with a few number of blood samples. Since the parameters used are subject to variation, we varied the cost of drugs and the pharmacist salary by plus and minus 30%. Pharmacokinetic analysis conducted by the pharmacist consisted of entering and analyzing factors level, identifying and proposing therapeutic optimization and dose frequency modification. That consumes 30% of the working time. Given this pharmacokinetic assessment, 2 types of optimization were proposed: drug substitution or dose optimization with the same drug. Once identified, possible optimization were discussed with the physician and then proposed to the patient family. Pharmacist's role was not restricted to pharmacokinetic analysis, but also includes tasks such as clinic attendance, which was the most time-consuming pharmacist activity. It includes discussion with families and new product administration education, and also discussion with the multidisciplinary team. 20% of the pharmacist time was dedicated to administrative activities such as family consult, organization of appropriate switch days, ensuring entire supply consumption, adverse event reporting, and inventory management support. Finally, the pharmacist also developed practice improvement policy and trained staff during 10% of his time. 14 patients aged 3 to 18 years old with hemophilia A or B, severe or moderate, and 1 patient with severe von Willebrand disease had their treatment optimized during this 1-year period. The transfusion medicine pharmacist made a total of 16 therapeutic optimization. As a result of the pharmacist intervention, the annual cost of clotting factors for these 15 patients will be reduced by 23%, or a saving of 321,000 Canadian dollars per year. After accounting for the 130,000 Canadian dollars investment for the employment of the pharmacist, this represents a total saving of 191,000 Canadian dollars per year, or an average saving about 12,000 Canadian dollars per year per optimization. The break-even point is the number of interventions needed to reimburse the pharmacist's salary. here from the 7th interventions, the employment of the pharmacy salary would be profitable. The return on investment is greater about 2.5 per time the initial investment. The largest saving will be seen in patients initially treated with plasma-derived factors. We noticed that treatment substitution would bring more cost saving than keeping the same drugs. We noticed that the treatment substitution would bring more cost saving than keeping the same drug treatment and optimize the cost. Finally, the transfusion medicine pharmacist expertise and mastery of the use of pharmacokinetic data was evidently able to personalize the clotting factor treatment for hemophilia patients. This personalization has resulted in more appropriate treatment for patients and a reduction in wasted dose, leading to significant savings. Thus, employing a pharmacist to manage clotting factors appeared to be a cost-efficient solution for clotting factor management. The hemophilia management program that I mentioned before resulted in saving that 20 times greater than the initial investment. This return on investment is higher than ours, but this difference can be explained by the larger number of patients they treat. Like ours, the study underlined the fact that the new role given to the pharmacist should be not limited to therapeutic optimization and treatment management, but should be extended. Indeed, it is also important to support patients and family in treatment management. Therapeutic optimization on its own is insufficient. This is especially true when dealing with a pediatric population. Overall, drug substitution results in greater cost saving than dose optimization with the same drug. So drug substitution should be preferred when possible, but that requires an understanding of pharmacokinetic profiles and increased support to explain changes to patients, especially when switching from a standard half-life to extended half-life factors. One limitation of the study could be the small population size that could be responsive for important cost variation between each of the optimization made. This limitation challenges whether it is appropriate to extrapolate the results to a larger scale. The validity of the course was difficult to confirm. Also, this was compensated by performing a sensitivity analysis. To conclude, involvement of a pharmacist in the hemophilia care team allowed to significantly reduce the cost of clotting factor. Through analysis of pharmacokinetic data, the relationship with patients and family, involvement in care team, and elaboration of protocol, the pharmacist can improve the management of clotting factors. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a question. So the intervention that you performed, were they like hospital interventions, or there were also community pharmacy interventions?
It was a clinical, hospital.
Okay, and how did you, if you could still explain me the cost effectiveness and cost saving side. I didn't get that quite well. So how did you save the money actually in the system?
Okay, right. The pharmacist, with the help of pharmacokinetic data, was able to adapt the treatment to the real need of the patient, and that reduced wastage doses of clotting factors.
Okay. And can I ask you a question? How did you manage to assess actually that too much medicines were given to the patients?
Before that, you want to say?
What tools were you using to assess that too much was provided?
It was it was the web accessible application that it's called WAPS EMO. that allow to give some pharmacokinetic data in patients with some just few blood samples.
So did you actually calculate it patient by patient by this intervention? You checked every single patient. Okay. Mm. Okay. Make sure. I have one more question to Olivia. And so cannabis are not because in Poland cannabis are legally used. I mean the pharmacist can. I mean the doctor can prescribe cannabis and he can go to the pharmacy and just get them. So what is the level of this regulation in Canada at the moment? What can be sold and how you manage this basically?
Yeah, so patients can use cannabis medically here, but legally they need what's called a medical document. So it's similar to a prescription, but it has a few different legal requirements that are set out by Health Canada. That basically considers them to be a medical cannabis patient. So if they are a medical cannabis patient, they have to go to what's called a licensed producer. So licensed producers, as the name suggests, they hold a license with Health Canada. So there's quite a few various across the country because the regulations are the same in terms of all the provinces. So that's kind of how you would go about it if you are a medical patient. If you are a recreational patient, you don't need a medical document because it is legalized. So essentially there are dispensaries, both legal, so those that are regulated by Health Canada, but also those that are obviously illegal dispensaries. It would be similar to just going to like a shop on the street. And there are regulations around how much they can purchase as comparison to a medical cannabis patient, but not yet, well, at least some people hope, is it available for patients to go into the pharmacy to get it. So as it currently stands right now with the regulations, pharmacies and pharmacists can't legally dispense cannabis.
Okay, that's good. Because in Poland we have a big problem with the food supplements as well. There's plenty of food supplements with cannabis, and we have the different fractions available. So okay, it's very difficult to assess if they are high quality ones. I think I prefer the one that are in the pharmacy and they are with the special vaporizer. There's a special machine administration to you can inhale them on or something like that. So I think this is better anyway. But anyway, I think I'm not an expert on this. But anyway, I believe in the regulation for sure.
Yeah. Is there any remaining questions?
I'm just thinking if there's anything else. So what do you think this will be a future of cannabis in Canada? What do you think will happen next?
There is some talk about pharmacies being legally able to dispense it, but obviously that comes with a lot of regulations and things around that. But currently as it stands, there is obviously a big push, whether people like it or not, for pharmacists to learn more about cannabis. So like starting in pharmacy school, it's now incorporated in the curriculum to learn about cannabis. And there's a lot of like extracurricular, almost like professional development courses. And that was actually one of the big moves here in Ontario. Community pharmacists, or just anyone that has a pharmacy license, had to complete like an online training in order to get certified in cannabis. But I think there's still a big push because there is a big knowledge gap. But because there is more increased usage, like I was showing today in my slides, we do see that there's a lot of patients going to the pharmacy and asking questions related to cannabis, whether it be like how to use it or if it interacts with their medication. That is a really common one.
Okay. Do you still have a problem like illegal cannabis in your country?
It's
out of the legal market, out of the special dispensing points, or
Yeah, I think initially there was a little bit of a discrepancy there when it was first legalized back on, I think it was October 17th, 2018 here. But I think more and more people are kind of getting used to the fact that it is legal, and you probably should, and most definitely should, go to a legal dispensary if you are using it recreational. But that being said, there always presents the question of, is illegal cannabis cheaper? I've heard some patients explain that. So there's always going to be that cost barrier and challenge with something that's legal versus not legal.
And my last question, yeah. Oh, really? Okay, my personal perception, I would say that, okay, I would be happy for medical cannabis to be dispensed in the pharmacy, that's for sure. I would be happy for pharmacies to do counseling on cannabis use. I think there's still like a knowledge gap in Poland because the standards is not there. I mean, people like provide this cannabis like, okay, take it as much as you, what doesn't kill you make you stronger, something like that basically. So take as much as you want, and they're not like very like clear guidelines. So everybody says it's good, and there's a strong lobbying from the companies who are just producing marijuana, medical marijuana. But I'm still missing the really like concrete and proper knowledge around it. Definitely, it's not here.
Yeah, there is some really useful, like I alluded to in the discussion there, the lower risk cannabis use guidelines. They were produced, I think it was about 3 years ago, by a few of the different boards, including one of the major centers for addiction medicine here. And like I alluded to as well, is I don't think there's been as widespread adoption of these recommendations. So perhaps there in Poland, it's creating these recommendations first and taking that first step, but then still here, as you can see, that implementation part is obviously also very crucial as well.
Well, I'm hoping it will go like better. At the moment, the doctors can only prescribe it, pharmacists need to dispense it, that's it, end of story.
Yeah.
So
it's still very fresh in a new area from
absolutely.
A lot of people, so I think it's all about adapting, and it can only get better from here. We can only learn more.
And people don't want to answer our questions because they think that we'll trace them. And they're worried about the employers, that they will just know that they are taking marijuana. That that's the main obstacle why we have only 169 responses in the project. Excellent.
The reality is, though, it's here, so we have to adapt with the times.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think we come to the end. We have like 3 minutes. So Regis, can we see your face in the end? Do you think? Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. So, we love technology anyway. Our projects are the best on the planet. Guys, thank you very much for actually for us this evening. So it's morning, I think, or afternoon, yeah. Thank you very much for doing these presentations. It was great to hear the results from Olivia and Damian, your intervention. I really like it. I think it was very useful, and I'm hoping that one day Poland will just get to this kind of level, definitely. But still, plenty of time in front of us to just get there.
Yeah.
Regis,
thank you so much for having us.
No, it's always a pleasure. Regis, thank you very much for making this happen anyway, you know. So I think it was a great cycle. We are just going towards the holidays now soon, and we have like a break for I think 3 months. But anyway, I think it was a great cycle. We had plenty of pharmacists watching us. Not only pharmacists, the doctors also. So this was also interesting when we just invite the medical doctors. So it means we are going in the right directions. Just to summarize today, because we are doing this, vaccinations today, and there was a TV in the vaccination point, and they were just trying to show how all the medical staff could work together, and we had different types: the paramedics, doctors, pharmacists, and physiotherapists. And it was the main concept was basically to show that we can work together. We don't argue. There's plenty of air, read money for everybody, and we all should be happy and share. That's it. So with this positive accent, I am just going to say thank you very much for listening to us on Wednesday, and hope to see you soon. Thank you very much. Regis, thank you very much. And guys, thank you very much, Olivia and Damin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.